everyone, and welcome to Coproduce Care, Chat for Care. My name's Sophie Chester-Glyn, and I am Director at Coproduce Care KIC. And I'm delighted today to have a few guests on, which is really exciting because you normally just have one, but we've got three. So we're going to start off with Neil Grant, and he is going to be talking to us about the CQC, the Care Quality Commission, and their new framework that they've got. Emergency Support Framework is what they're calling it, ESF. So I will introduce him properly in a second, but safe to say that Neil is from Gordon Partnership Solicitors. And I came across Neil actually very recently, and I noticed that he'd done a message on LinkedIn about the new framework, and that there's a little bit of a difference between how we understand it and how the Care Quality Commission is talking about it, in terms of, it's supposed to be supportive, but actually there's a lot behind it, which we felt would be really interesting for providers to know about, especially. So as always, if you think this is going to be something that someone you know is going to be interested in, then share this wherever you're watching us, if it's on Twitter, or if it's in LinkedIn, or on any Facebook or wherever else, then do let other people know so we can get more people to the live stream, because the more people that join, this is the way it works, more people that join, the more people hear about it, and the more we can share this, we think, is really useful information. So after Neil, he'll be talking about that. You'll get an opportunity to ask questions. So if you're a provider that's waiting to have your call with CQC about this new support framework, wondering what questions are going to come up or what it means, or you've already had it and you just want to talk about your experience, then get busy on the chat. Do share your ideas and your thoughts. We love to have a conversation with you. So Neil's here. He's a solicitor, but obviously everything he's saying right now is for free. So do ask him any questions, and we've got him for half an hour. So as soon as I'm finishing giving a bit of an update, then you can pop in and out with questions, and he'll be looking at those as well. And also, if you are joining us on YouTube, then please click on the subscribe button if you haven't already. Do like if you're on Facebook, and if you want to know more information or get pop-ups or notifications about what's going on, we've got a few live streams this week. Then if you click on the bell on YouTube, then you don't even have to think about it. You'll just get a reminder, and you can log in if you want to, or you can watch it later if that suits you better. And as I say, just share as much as you can, because we're doing this all for free. We're just really passionate about social care at Coproduce Care, so we really want to get as many people involved as possible. There is something else I will be mentioning at the end, and that's about getting your voices involved in a government consultation about the workforce, so the social care workforce. So if you're interested in that, stick around, because we'll let you know we're doing some webinars at the end of the week, and there's a questionnaire so that we can put together a joint consultation response to the Health and Social Care Select Committee. So that will all come up later. So jam-packed with stuff. After Neil, we'll be having David Smallacombe and Deian Glyn from Care and Support West. Based here, obviously, in the West. They'll be talking about local issues, but also about a lot of the national issues that we're facing at the moment, and commenting on some of the things that Neil has spoken about. So that's enough of me rambling. I do tend to ramble. I'm really sorry. So I'm going to introduce Neil. So I'll bring him into the studio now. Hello, Neil. How are you?
Hello, Sophie. Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction.
That's okay. Thank you so much for joining us. And I know, I'm also the day job, I'm a care provider. So when I saw that you put a message out on LinkedIn to talk about this I almost want to call it inspection framework, because of how, after talking to you, that's kind of what it really is. But that's not the name. It's supposed to be a support framework. So maybe you can just introduce your organization, and then talk to us a bit about this new framework.
Yeah, no, thank you very much indeed. Yes, I mean, I work for a law firm that's based in Guildford in London. Or at the moment, like all lawyers in the country, I'm sort of working from home. And I've been sort of working in the sector probably for about 30 years. When I started, I used to box and cox between sort of registration authorities and providers. I then moved over and I acted exclusively for regulators for quite a number of years, including the Commission for Social Care Inspection, the Healthcare Commission, and then latterly the Care Quality Commission in its first year. And then about 10 years ago, I decided to move on and work exclusively for providers. And that's what I do at the moment. So I don't act for regulators, commissioners, or individuals, which means I've got an independent voice. And I very much aim to try and promote the interests of providers out there.
Great. And why did you feel that you needed to sort of put out some more information about this new framework? I probably should just say, for anybody who doesn't know too much about it, now that the CQC has stopped or halted temporarily the inspections of going into care services, this is something that they've come up with. You can go onto their website. They've got information for providers about this emergency support framework. This document was published on the 1st of May. That's something that you can find. It may be updated by now, but this is the latest one we found. So yeah, why did you feel that you needed to really discuss this?
Well, I think, first of all, really, I mean, the actual wording, emergency support framework, I think is of interest to me, because CQC really, I suppose, over recent years has been very much a sort of command and control regulator that has focused on compliance and taken quite a lot of enforcement action against providers. And I suppose CQC hasn't really ever sort of pushed itself forward as being an improvement agency. It can encourage improvement, obviously, under the legislation, but really its primary aim is to protect service users. It doesn't owe a duty of care to providers. The duty of care that it owes is to service users, those that will use services out there that are regulated. So what I've always said to my clients is that they're not your friends, and they're not supposed to be your friends. They've got a particular role, which is arm's length. And I was slightly surprised, actually, with some of the mood music that was coming out of CQC, where they were saying, well, we're all on the same page, we're all part of the same team. And I can understand why they said that in this pandemic. And they do, I think, genuinely want to provide support. But you've got to realise there's always a tension there, really, between that supportive function, that guide and counsellor function, and their prosecutor function as well. So I think there's a bit of an existential problem there with CQC. So that accounts, I think, for some of the sort of mixed messages that we've been getting from CQC over the last week or so. On the one hand, this is a friendly, informal chat. We may not ask you all the questions. You don't need to worry. You don't need to prepare. And on the other hand, they say, well, you know, if we come across any problems, well, we'll escalate it to our partner agencies. We may consider a targeted inspection. That's a new form of inspection that they consulted on for the first time last autumn. We don't really know what it involves. And it could lead on to enforcement action, or we will work with partner agencies in minimising risk. So there is that sort of, I think, inherent tension within it. And in my view, really, it ought to be called the Emergency Support and Intervention Framework, because there will be occasions when they will have to intervene.
So before you...
Sorry, carry on, Sophie.
This is the good part, but before you go on to that, I just want to show people how it's presented, as you just said, on their documentation that's on the website. So we've had a look at some of the information that they have here and how that they describe it, and it's specifically touted as being something to help you understand whether, or help them understand whether you, so the provider, needs support with anything, but also that providers shouldn't need to prepare for them. So these calls that will happen. So yes, carry on.
Yeah, I mean, in its simplest terms, it's really a telephone conversation with a Q&A. And CQC has indicated the areas that it will focus on. It'll focus on safe care and treatment, staffing issues, protection from abuse, and neglect, and obviously the whole issue of quality assurance and risk management through this period. So those are sort of familiar areas that providers will know of, obviously through regulation by CQC over the last decade or so. But it is different. It is a structured approach that they're adopting. And what is, I think, new about this is that they have a digital tool that sits behind this, and they will be risk assessing your business. So the answers that you give to these questions will lead on to scorings that will directly risk assess your business, performance assess your business in relation to the pandemic. And I think that is important. So you'll be classified as managing or needing support. And it may well be that the majority of providers out there will fall within the managing category. I very much hope so. But it doesn't appear to be sort of risk assessed based on sort of past activity. It very much is focused on the current situation as we would expect. So I'm coming across situations where providers are saying to me, well, actually, we are rated inadequate, and we haven't heard from CQC over the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Whereas if you've had an outbreak of COVID-19, it's very, very likely that you will be prioritised and you will get that sort of call quite early on. And I suppose really it does build on what CQC as a regulator is doing anyway. It sort of monitors, doesn't it? It assesses providers, and it's been doing that for a number of years. But I do think, in a sense, it's almost a bit like a desktop inspection of this, because they're going to be using that information to feed in and risk assess your service. And that will then lead to decisions that will be made about it. And CQC has said expressly on its website that they will use this information for planning their sort of regulatory action during the pandemic, but also after the pandemic. So it's highly likely that they will obviously take on trust to a large extent what you say in your answers, but they will be coming back in due course. And they will say, well, that was very interesting what you said about chasing PPE and making sure you did that and risk assess this. Where's the evidence to actually support that? So it's important that even though CQC may not ask you at this stage for supporting evidence, that you need to be confident that you've actually got that information to hand for the day when inevitably CQC will come back in.
So effectively, you know, the bit that I just put up there that said you don't need to prepare, you might not need to prepare, but you will need to show evidence of what you're doing. So you really probably should prepare. And are there questions that people or providers can look at to prepare for when they get that call from the inspector to do this ESF?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I gave those sort of 4 areas that I mentioned that they will focus on, and that's understandable, bearing in mind the current situation. But sitting behind those 4 areas are 15 questions, and those questions have now been published by CQC. I've been asking for them for a while, and the initial response was, well, they're a matter for the inspector, they're not a matter for the provider. But of course, it didn't take long, did it, before those questions started going out onto social media, onto Facebook and other platforms. And last week, CQC actually did disclose those questions, and they are on their website. They're rather buried away on their website under the area about mental capacity in dolls during the pandemic. But they are there, and I think providers would be minded, or should be minded, to look at those questions carefully and actually prepare for that question that will come to them about whatever it is. It could be, for example, about ensuring that policies and procedures are kept up to date, amended in light of the changes at the centre, but also that those matters are actually communicated properly to staff through the organisation. So those sorts of questions, I mean, it seems to me strange in a way that CQC on the one hand can be sort of quite light touch in their approach to say, oh, don't worry about actually preparing for this. But in actual fact, at the same time, they're saying, well, in actual fact, we've got something here that is an extension of what we do in terms of assessing providers. It's not just the CQC Insight risk assessment, it's actually the CQC COVID-19 risk assessment. So it actually means something, it actually matters. And those answers that you give obviously will sort of affect your scoring. There'll also be other intelligence that CQC will have as well that it can draw on. And I think, generally speaking, I think these interviews are supposed to last for probably about an hour, I suppose. Although I'm hearing stories of them lasting for an hour and a half, some of them even more than 2 hours. And CQC, I think, said at their last board meeting last week that lengthy conversations with providers will indicate that some form of intervention is likely. So if you get a short call, that's obviously a good sign. If it does go on and they ask for information, supporting information, then clearly they do have concerns.
Okay, so say that I am a registered manager and I have just heard this. Can they actually ring up and talk to anybody in the organisation, or can I tell my staff that really they need to speak to me? Because I know that, you know, as a manager, a lot of the things that we're doing in terms of high-level risk assessments and protocols, staff will know of, but they won't know the detail of it. So if the inspector spoke to a member of staff, they might not fully get everything that we're doing. And then there's not a true representation of everything that's going on.
I think that's a very good question. My understanding is that CQC, first of all, contact the provider, perhaps 3 days to a week before the call, and they try and set that up with the manager. I suppose one would hope that the manager will be available. If not, there'd have to be another senior person within the service that would have to participate within that call. There's nothing really to stop a quality compliance manager within a provider from participating as well within the call. And what I actually do think is important is that you have somebody on the call that can take a note, handwritten or preferably even typed, so that you've got a record of that conversation. The inspector will be making his or her own notes about that conversation, but it's highly unlikely that they will be shared with the service. All you will get on the back of this conversation is this rather brief document called a summary record. And those will have the responses, well, they'll have the 15 questions, and then the inspector will make a judgment about whether or not you are managing in relation to a particular question or you need support. And that's one of the concerns I've got, really, that it's very much a sort of binary choice. It's yes or no. And of course, what we realise in life is that life, it tends to be sort of more nuanced, tends to be grey rather than black or white. So I'm sort of slightly concerned about that sort of rather sort of arbitrary sort of approach to how they make decisions. And then at the end of the report, there's a summary section, which is only 250 words long, so that doesn't allow a great deal. My apologies, I'll just
Okay. We will give you a second. So whilst Neil's sorting that out, just to let you know that please do put any questions that you have, any thoughts that you have in the chat. Otherwise, we will carry on. And do again share if you need to share with anybody, anyone who you think will find this useful, and of course they can watch back as well. Okay.
Sophie,
Neil,
thank you. My apologies for that. And actually, Sophie, you warned me in advance that I should turn off my telephone. And this is maybe this is as well. It's my mother.
Really
The only person who ever phones me on the landline. So
I will let you on.
very embarrassing. But 1 second.
Right. Yeah. So if you can just go onto our YouTube if you're watching us there, and do subscribe and like I said earlier, it drives lots of people to the channel. And a couple of things I'll put up as well is there are some things that we've picked up we could share that explains a little bit more about the ESF. This, goes through that it's supposed to be, from the CQC's point of view, honest conversations with providers, health and care staff. So do be prepared if that your care staff may be interviewed, if they happen to pick up the phone, by Care Quality Commission. That's, all right and proper. But I suppose in the time when we're firefighting a lot, we're not thinking about letting the staff know about the inspector, because that's not forefront of our minds. But the inspector may call literally on the phone rather than at the door, and they may be asking questions just to make sure the staff themselves are feeling confident with the plans that are in place. And then some other pointers there about the other things that they will be wanting to do. But I suppose behind all of it is just to have in mind, from what Neil is saying, is that it's more than just a friendly chat to see everything's running okay. It could be something that might be used in later sort of quality assurance with the service. And here is, again, these are all available on the CQC's website, and I will actually add these to the description on YouTube, some of the areas that they may be looking at. And this is on their website. Some of the other things behind what Neil was saying, which comes behind the inspection this new support framework, is that they will have technology behind it to see what risk rating they give each service. So I'll bring Neil back in now. Hi,
My
Neil.
apologies for all of that, but there we are. I have learned from this. This is my first live stream, by the way.
Live stream.
Hugely embarrassed, and my apologies to the organisers. So yes, I mean, sort of coming back to sort of CQC in this particular process, I mean, I said I think that a record ought to be taken during the telephone conversation. You may even want to send that on to the CQC, because you might want to say, well, actually, we just want sort of confirmation that what we've actually said, what we've actually discussed, our recollection actually is an accurate one. So I think that's important. One of the concerns that I've got about this particular process is that CQC has indicated that it's not a regulatory process. Well, I think the first thing I'd say about that is that everything that CQC does under the law is a regulatory process. So if they try to argue that what they're doing isn't a regulatory process, it's unlawful. And I don't think they'd want to actually admit to that. So it is a regulatory process. They say it's not an inspection. I think that's highly debatable, actually. Anyway, let's put that to one side. What they say is that the summary record won't be published. There won't be any ratings given as part of this particular sort of process. It's not an inspection. There's no fact and accuracy comment process. But I think the important thing is that if there is any dispute during the process, if, for example, there are inaccuracies you think within the record, or you think that really you haven't been treated fairly through this process, then I think you ought to go back to CQC, the inspector, and actually point that out and have any sort of corrections made. Equally, as part of the process, if they identify issues around compliance, let's say, then I think it's important that you do follow that up. So it may be that you want to put an action plan in with sort of key dates, timescales, telling CQC what you'll want to do, because obviously you want to instill confidence in CQC that you are managing through this process. There's no defined frequency in terms of how many of these calls will happen, but I think it's more likely that if you are defined as being not managing, i.e. needing support, you'll get more frequent calls.
Yeah.
And what CQC have said is that although the summary record itself won't be shared with partner agencies, including the local authority, the content of that conversation will be shared. Any concerns will be shared with directors of adult social services and other bodies if necessary.
So what is the involvement of ADAS within all of this? Because I feel that I had an email that came into my inbox last week that said there was almost like a joint statement between CQC and ADAS. What's their involvement in this support framework?
Well, I think that's an important sort of area that you've highlighted, actually, because this popped up on the CQC website last week, and the tone was slightly different, really. I mean, I think there's a realization now within CQC that there clearly are problems out there. Providers are experiencing huge pressures, both in terms of operations, but also financially as well, as this particular pandemic proceeds. And of course, we're going to go from pandemic into endemic eventually. So I think we can look at this particular framework continuing in place for some while, probably up to 6 months after the pandemic. That's what CQ said at a board meeting. But coming back to this, I mean, clearly CQC wants to be seen to be working with ADAS. I mean, obviously that's important. And what they say is that where there are serious concerns, they will be sharing that information with directors of adult social services, and there will be ongoing conversations with them. And in terms of support, they say, well, in actual fact, there could be support from CCGs, local authorities, other partner agencies, NHS trusts, or even providers locally. So you could have support from provider to provider, and we've seen some of that through the pandemic. But it's very much, I think, this idea that CQC really isn't a support-driven organisation. All it can really do is signpost to other sources. So it could be the Social Care Institute for Excellence, for example, their resources, or other sort of agencies like Public Health England in terms of their guidance, which seems to change every 5 minutes. So there's that, I think, that they will do. And that's my sort of worry, really, that they're not going to be providing too much direct support themselves. My question to myself, really, is how can CQC advise providers in circumstances where they're not actually visiting anyway? So it's very difficult, isn't it, to see how direct support advice can be provided when they're not actually going out to the services concerned. But the board meeting last week was very much along the lines that, well, we've set up this new COVID-19 Insight intelligence framework. We're getting bags and bags of information coming in. So they obviously feel confident that they are starting to know what's really happening out there, sort of region to region and locality to locality. And I think that's going to be the platform for them making decisions that increasingly CQC are going to start re-inspecting. And they're going to start re-inspecting using this targeted methodology. And I mean, one of the things I do, sad person that I am, is I do put in lots of Freedom of Information Act requests. And I've got one coming out from CQC, hopefully at the beginning of next month, which is going to be asking questions about this targeted methodology, because I really don't have much of a clue how it's going to operate, because we haven't actually had very much information coming out of CQC. So it's very much, I think, that in terms of support, it's going to be support from others, but in terms of intervention, it'll be CQC intervening, but also in some cases, obviously passing that information on to local authorities who may take their own action via safeguarding and under their own contracts that they may hold with people that are placed in services.
Yeah. So overall, it seems like, you know, if I was thinking, you mentioned at the beginning that providers are going to be, you know, they're trying to, the whole aim of CQC is to help people, help individuals, people they're supposed to be supporting. So if I was someone who was looking after, you know, having a family member being looked after in the care service, I think, oh, actually, this is really good because we're able to get, you know, see, there's oversight of organizations. They're working together. There's better oversight. They're questioning what providers are doing. But the only problem is you might be a very busy provider thinking this is just a regular chat. But where is this information to say, actually, we really need to know of the best of your ability, everything you're doing, come prepared. It's not just a friendly chat, because we may unnecessarily kickstart a lot of measures, which, you know, might just be because you just are having a really busy day and you weren't on your best performance. Like what happens with any inspection? I suppose one of the questions I have is, why isn't it just called a inspection support framework or something? Why leave the inspection bit out?
Well, I think that's a very good point, and I think CQC are wanting to come across as being supportive at this particular time, bearing in mind the pressures, and they don't want to frighten providers, obviously, unduly at this time, and they also know that they're not going out and not carrying out these inspections, so they're not the site visit, they're not the. But of course, an inspection isn't just a site visit. An inspection will include the monitoring that goes on through time. And I do think so, because I think this is an assessment or a review of services. So I think it is really, it's a form of inspection. But of course, the difficulty then, if CQC calls it an inspection, then there's a certain process that follows. There's the factual accuracy check process. There's an obligation to publish a report in relation to that. So they're obviously not wanting to do any of that at this particular time, partly because they perhaps think it's going to be a burden on providers, but also it's obviously a fairly limited exercise in itself. Obviously, it's a desktop exercise. But you're absolutely right. I think it is part of an inspection monitoring process that will ultimately feed into that inspection that all providers will get ultimately, whether it's a routine inspection or responsive inspection, or more immediately in relation to a targeted inspection.
So it could actually, the evidence that they pick up from any of these ESF calls could literally be within that report when we do come around to getting back to the usual inspection framework. So they may refer back to any evidence that you gave or didn't give. So it is quite important to make sure you prepare for these.
I think so, yeah. I mean, obviously they're wanting sort of open and honest conversations. I mean, I think that's obviously important, and focus on the honest, because it's important that you actually don't just say something to please the provider, And if you're sort of unsure about something in terms of the detail, you may need to say to the inspector, look, I'll come back to you in a day or so with an email with all the information that you're asking for. And also sometimes CQC inspectors have their pet interests or likes and preferences. And even if they do give support, one has to be slightly careful and wary about what they are saying. Because within the Adult Social Care Directorate, these people are not clinically trained. They can't give you any clinical advice. And I doubt very much whether they're sort of experts in infection prevention and control. So, you need to be sort of cautious about obviously what they're sort of saying. But I very much expect that CQC won't go down the line of seeking to give you pretty meaningful advice through this process. It very much will be signposting, but ultimately, if there are concerns, they will look at some form of intervention.
Great, thank you for that. I found that really interesting, and we have had we've been very quiet on the chat. I'm hoping because people are listening. But Jodie has just said that they have their call tomorrow, but prepared today as with the CQC, you're not quite sure what they can ask and evidence is ready. So that's a really good comment that, providers are managing to kind of get together what they need and get prepared. Obviously, we've talked about tips and, things to kind of concentrate on. I would say if you've got your risk management, if you've got your protocols, if you've had your training matrix and all those type of things, you probably need ready to go. So you just have them so you can bang out those numbers about the percentage of people who have been tested or whatever. Are there any other tips you would give Jodie for her call tomorrow, or anything that you would say, maybe be honest about the issues that she might be having as well?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one of the things the CQC has said in terms of support is that that they will be a conduit for information to other agencies, other organisations. And so, yes, I mean, I think if there is a particular sort of stress within the local economy that providers sort of face with, then I think that should be picked up, because obviously providers, services don't operate in a vacuum. That you're operating within a health social care economy. All sorts of issues at the moment, obviously, with the adequacy of GP provision and also district nursing provision in many services. So these things do need to be sort of flagged up. Obviously, the issue about PPE continues to be a problem. There's an issue as well, I think, about sort of funds getting through to providers from local authorities. So I think those are sort of the types of issues. I mean, one of the things I was surprised about with the set of questions is there's no questioning about finances. And I think at the moment that's going to be a big issue, really, for many providers. And CQC is picking up on that. And it's reflected in their sort of insight publication that they're going to put out every 2 weeks, I understand. So the more that providers can sort of feed into that, I think the better. But don't be frightened by it. I'm not one of these lawyers that sort of says to sort of people out there, oh, it's going to be awful. I mean, no, I mean, I think it probably will be, hopefully, should be quite a pleasant experience, and it should be a supportive experience. But all I would say is that, yes, you should, of course, be honest, but you should prepare and you should actually have answers to those questions that are meaningful, because you want to get the most out of that particular conversation. And indeed, CQC should be wanting to get the most out of it, because they'll obviously be sort of risk assessing, performance assessing your service. So I think on both sides, it's actually critical, really, that it works.
Great. Thank you, Neil. That has been absolutely fantastic.
I'm really sorry about what happened. There we go. My apologies for the interruption. There we are.
Of being live, it's we people expect this. I'm half expecting.
That just shows it's live, doesn't it? There we go. So yeah.
No, it's fine. Absolutely, don't worry about it. I'm sure that people want to know a little bit more about how they get in touch with your organisation. We will have details about how to get in touch with Neil's solicitors firm in the description if you're on YouTube, and we'll put some more information out there. But just safe to say thank you very much, Neil Grant from Gordon's Partnership Solicitors, and thank you so much for coming on our Co-Produce Care Chat for Care this evening.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you. Take care. Oh, just cut him off. So yeah, that was Neil. Really interesting stuff. I felt like I wanted to grill him more, but that is enough for now. And there's lots of more information on CQC's website that you could look up on that. And for Jodie, I think it was, who's got her call tomorrow, it will be fine. You'll be fantastic. And very, very much good luck with that. So coming up now, we're going to speak to David Smallacombe and Deian Glyn from Care and Support West, which is a association in the West that supports care providers. David is the CEO and Deian is the chair. We have spoken to them before. We've had a Coproduce Care chat with them in the very, very early days. The first one we did about 3 weeks ago when we started doing these. So they're coming back again to give a bit of commentary on what we just heard and talk about, you know, a bit of commentary on what's going on for them in their area and generally in the care sector. So welcome both. Hello, David. Hello, Deian.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, hello, good evening.
Yeah, not fine. Welcome. Lovely to see you both. I'm going to just mess around with this view. Nope, that doesn't work. I'm just noticed
half my head. That's lovely.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
You're just, you know, our logo. I'm going to take our logo off. There we are, so we can see you properly. So welcome both. Like I said, we've had you both on before, but I just think it'd be great to hear from you again to talk about what's going on in your area. And I know, David, you were being in contact with providers directly about their issues. But before we go on to that, who is or who are Care and Support West?
Say that again. Who's what?
You, Care and Support West.
Work for David. Do you want to go?
Oh, I can go. I'm happy to go first. Yes, you've already introduced us. I'm the chief exec and have been around for a long time, and Dan's the chair. I certainly have just been listening, and I know Dan has as well, to Neil beforehand. And some of the things that jumped off the page to me, I just want to make reference to. The first of which was CQC is not an improvement agency. I thought that was a really interesting point, that as a provider and as an association, we need to remember they're not, I was going to say they're not there to improve agencies. That's not the case, but they are not an improvement agency. And the thing that came directly after that almost was that they have a prosecutor function. And it's good to keep those two things high on the agenda, I think, because one of the points that he made then next was that any problems found in these questions that, Sophie, you've been asking him to explain about, and is it 15 questions or 8 questions, whatever it is, will be escalated to partner organizations, which means commissioners, essentially. And I thought that was really interesting. And then the fourth point that jumped off the page for me was that they are risk assessing your business, not only now in terms of its performance in relation to COVID, but post-COVID as well. I think those are interesting points that it would do well for our providers that we represent and those that we don't, but we know across the west of England are looking very carefully at those things. So the prosecutor function, the escalating to partner agencies, and the risk assessing of your business. And that sounds very different from, excuse me, we'll call you next week and have a bit of a chat. What
were your thoughts on what Neil said, Deian? Did you find anything quite surprising?
Not surprising as such. I thought it was really interesting, actually. I thought you gave a really good overview. And the point that David made, I've got notes on that as well. I think interesting that CQC have called it a supportive thing. I think when I've heard from CQC inspectors and when we've been on the Wednesday calls that we have every fortnight, the CQC seem to be wanting to help providers. I think that is the case, but like Neil said, we do have to be careful. Well, not be careful, just be mindful that they are a regulatory body, and in essence, they're there to make sure to safeguard people, and that's what their primary function is. That doesn't mean they can't be supportive, but both have to work together. I think the other interesting thing he said was that there won't be any factual accuracy. So it'll be a case of the inspector taking notes, them then making a summary, and then taking that forward. And I think that's very interesting, because just based on inspections we've had and heard from other providers, sometimes the draft inspection you get is very different to the conversation sometimes you've had. And the factual accuracy quite often is a way or a mechanism of raising issues that or changes that should be made. And if you haven't got that opportunity, that concerns me a little bit before it goes to a wider audience. And I hope that inspectors will share their thoughts and have a discussion and be willing to discuss those thoughts before they make their final judgment, if you like. Because I think that's important. I'm not sure what other providers would think, but that's what I think. Anyway.
The other two things that jumped out for me, Sophie, were that where is the owner in all of this? The CQC questions are directed toward the registered manager, and I can understand that from the point of view of people knowing what goes on day on day on day. But there was no position for the owner of the organization in this, and that's really quite crucial for the organizations that we represent across the piece. And the other thing was, and Neil made mention of this, there was no discussion or no question that talks about service sustainability, and that whole thing around the amount of COVID additional spend that's going on right now and has been going on for the last couple of months and will continue to go on. There was no representation or no interest, it seems, from the regulator in sustainability. And to be absolutely blank about it, sustainability equals care, equals people being looked after appropriately, citizens and residents in local authorities being looked after appropriately. That's what sustainability is about.
I found it quite interesting what he said at the end when he talked about, nothing is given in a vacuum, like this care isn't provided in a vacuum. So they do have a bit of a better recognition that they need to be working with other agencies, but and that's how the support may come in if somebody's struggling maybe. But what I don't understand is why the way it is, which is like replacing inspection, wasn't just plainly set out in the documents that I shared. So when I shared those documents, those snippets, those overlays, it shows that the rhetoric is behind, we just want to have a chat. But actually, and from what people are saying, you need to be prepared. You need to accept that what you might say or do or not do is going to go into an inspection report somewhere down the line. Lots of people will say, well, that's obvious. But when you're so busy, sometimes it's not. And I don't know why they haven't laid that out quite clearly. It just seems a little bit unfair.
Yeah, I agree. And, when you put it all in the context of everything else that's going on, my point earlier about sustainability, where you've got councils, not just here in our area in the west of England, but everywhere across the piece, they've managed to, for example, share funds from the first tranche from the government, but the second tranche and the third tranche, none of that money's come out yet. And this is significant money that's going into local authorities and that providers require to not only maintain sustainability, but in order to care for the people they're looking after appropriately. And then when you begin to look at, for example, the third tranche, which is the infection protection and control bit, you find suddenly that it's only related to organizations that have registered care beds with CQC. So where's supported living? Where's domiciliary care? These are the kinds of things I think that we ought to be challenging, and we'll try and do as we can in the association locally.
So Deian, maybe you can explain what these kind of tranches, for anyone who doesn't know what they are, of money are.
That's fine. So the first bit of money, I think, well, certainly most providers in our region have received it. Different local authorities have done different things, but some have done £100 extra per week per bed. Some are pound an hour on each home care hour or each supported living hour. And most of that was up to the end of May. The second tranche, and that was ring fenced from the government to local authorities just for social care. So it had to go to support the social care sector in those areas. The second tranche of money, as we understand it, is, although the government seemed to suggest that it's for social care, they've given money to local authorities to support social care further. It's not ring fenced for social care when it's been sent to the local authorities. Most local authorities we've spoken to have got additional pressures of their own because they're businesses in a sense, and they've lost a lot of money, they've lost a lot of income, and therefore we've got no idea how much money of that second bit of tranche of money we're going to get as providers. And then the third bit of money is, as David said, is around infection control. And again, as I understand it, 75% of the 600 million goes straight to providers as long as they complete the capacity tracker. And update the capacity tracker, I think, daily and complete the training. And 25% of it, it goes to the social work, to the local authority to decide. It's still ring fence for social care, but the local authority has a bit more discretion about whether they pass that on to providers or whether they use that to support the social sector in that area in a different way. I think that's a brief summary. Is that right, David? Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's right. The neither of the first or the second tranches were specifically only ring fenced for social care. They went into local authorities, and the local authorities made a judgment about what would be social care or not. But you're right in the rest of the detail. I think that for those people who are in the west of England and get our blog thing on a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I would encourage you to look at it from Monday, in other words, yesterday, because in that there's a set of questions that the local authorities are trying to struggle with, which make reference to the point that Deian made in relation to some of the challenges that they've got. And it offers you the opportunity to come back to me and tell me what priority you would give to some of those, and to add other priorities that you think are really important. We've had a half a dozen or so back already, and that's really great. But I would love some more, because what the councils have told me, because I've spoken to all 4 of the directors of adult social care, what they've told me is they really are keen to hear what providers have to say about that. And, although we know all sorts of things that people say aren't necessarily accurate, I do, in my conversations with them, I'm really clear that they are keen to hear what people have got to say, because they're in a tricky position. So I'm not asking for sympathy for them, but what I am saying to you is, what I'm saying to providers is, give us information so that we can help them make some grown-up and useful decisions.
I think
that's frustrating, though. Yeah, it is frustrating, though, David, isn't it? Because they have known about this second tranche of money for some time now. Well, some time in the context of what we're going through, if you like. And in essence, we still don't know where we stand at the end of May, whether any of those monies that were agreed are going to be extended. And the likelihood is probably not. And I know we've got this the third tranche of money coming in, but again, that's got a whole heap of caveats on it as well. And how quick that will actually be distributed, again, we don't know. And, I think certainly the providers I've spoken to, and, speaking on behalf of ourselves, we're just frustrated that there isn't any clear picture of, what the finances look for. And like you said right from the start, if you don't know what's coming in, it's very difficult to make decisions, and it's very difficult to give direction to, purchasing PPE and stuff costs a lot of money. And it's even worse when you can't do it with any forthright planning because you don't know what money's coming in. So I think it's fair to say that we've been frustrated, and I'm like I said, I'm not saying, and I don't want to go against the councils too much, but I know they're going through their own issues, but certainly from a provider point of view, it is frustrating that there's not any clear thing, and it's more frustrating when the government come out saying that there's this lot of money coming through when it actually isn't coming through.
Yeah, can I just, that's a great segue. Thanks for that, Deian. I totally forgot about this clip I was going to share. So I'm going to share this clip. And just tell me what you think.
It's been clear that this horrible virus affects older people most. So right from the start, we've tried to throw a protective ring around our care homes. We set out our first advice in February, and as the virus grew, we strengthened it throughout.
So, David, from the providers that you support, have they felt this protective ring that Matt Hancock was talking about there, that's been with them from February?
They felt the protective ring that's around the NHS, yes. But have they felt one around themselves? I don't. I'm relatively confident that if I said anything other than no, they haven't, I'd have somebody. I'd have somebody knocking on my door straight away, even though I am in Wales. But I think that it is. It's a real difficulty, I think, for. I have to say that I no longer watch the Downing Street announcements because I would be in danger of breaking my television by throwing something at it. But it is the case that no, the social care sector has not had a ring thrown around it, and still doesn't have a ring thrown around it. And it is still the case that PPE and other supportive either equipment or funding is available to the social care sector. It's a fib, and I'm not embarrassed to say that. And if some of the MPs that Sophie, you've been working with and we've seen on the Wednesday calls are listening to this, I'm hoping that they will be able to come back and say at a further Wednesday call why they think it is still the government's position that they're supporting social care. To some extent they are, but not quick enough and not fast enough. And none of us know whether or not there'll be a second or third peak.
Yeah. Deian, have you got any comments on that?
No, I think in simple terms, they haven't at all. I think it started now, but that let's be honest, that only became because public opinion swayed them that way. I think had that not happened, we would have been a few more weeks before we'd have been touched. And I think, I just echo David's thoughts really. And I think, the homes, if anything, there would have been far more deaths and far more lives at risk had care homes not just acted by themselves and started their own lockdowns way before the government guidance, had they not bulk purchased PPE and basically not followed the government guidance. Because if you did follow government guidance, you would have been in trouble because the guidance was so late coming, it was far too late for most care homes. I think that's the frustrating thing now is just, yeah.
And I'd just add to that, we're part and parcel of a group that meets across England, from Cornwall up to wherever. And it is the case that the factual information about the number of COVID patients, service users, however you want to describe it, in something like 60 or more % of residential and nursing care homes do not have COVID within them, either as an issue, or that they have had deaths from COVID. And what's interesting is that if you listen to the news and you listen to the BBC, then you'd think that was a very different picture. And I think that sometimes that isn't the way that that's described is not helpful. So even though, but that doesn't take away from the point that was being made by Dan earlier, which is that with or without COVID being in your home, you need to have the right support and equipment in order to ensure that you remain out with that, and that your staff and their families in particular are protected in that way.
One question I wanted to ask was, your organisation doesn't, you mentioned right at the start, David, your organisation doesn't just work with care homes, and I did put this to Helen Whately, the care minister, but the fact that the social care, now that a lot of people know, the social care sector is filled with so many different disparate parts, I'm quite worried about the supported living. That's the next concern that I've got. Do you fear the same sort of issues, or is that something that you're not hearing from providers that you work with?
No, I hear it almost daily, and I did today, for example, receive information from a provider that does do supported living, and in particular supported living in the learning disability field. And they were saying that they feel not only left out but not listened to, and that the services that are going on in that field are not being recorded accurately and properly. So I think that that's absolutely right. So, but I don't stop at supported living. I go on further to domiciliary care, and also live-in care and other kinds of supported living, which are very not identical, but very similar to either residential or nursing care, except that it's being delivered in a different place. And I think that those areas of the social care sector is enormously wide and has more staff in it than the NHS has ever had, and looks after more individuals than the NHS does on a weekly or a yearly basis. And yet, still yet, neither the local population or the national population or the local or central government is able to take account of that and support it in the appropriate way. That's only my view, but I think it's shared across the piece.
How about you, Deian?
Yeah, and just to add to that, I still don't think people do know what social care is. They know what care homes are now, because that's been in the public eye a lot now. And the problem is, whilst it's been nice to have social care in the limelight a little bit, it's still all negative, and it's still all about deaths in care homes. If anything, it's putting more people off care homes and the social care sector than it's putting on, in my opinion. And I don't think people do know what the social care sector is, apart from care homes, elderly. So I think this epidemic, pandemic, whatever, has shone a bit more of a light on social care sector and the issues we face in the sector. I'm not convinced that that people do know what social care is any more than what they did before, if I'm totally honest with you. Because what they see on the news is just care homes and elderly care. They don't even see the home care, and the home care is the biggest employer. You know, and if you look at Twitter and things like that and follow, EQC and stuff, that's one of their big gripes, really, is that, the home care guidance only came out 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago. It's ridiculous.
I mean, why do you think that is? Why do you think there's is it just purely political? It's whatever's hitting the headlines, that's the government is purely reactive. So whatever's hitting the headlines is whatever they prioritize the guidance for. Or, because care homes, you might say, well, care homes has a lot of older people, and therefore they are the people who are most at risk. But then that argument doesn't carry when you think about home care also is for people who are in that category. Why do you think there is this, lack of preparation with the whole of social care?
It's difficult to know, isn't it? Unless you're in it, but there's two things I think. I'll go on, David.
Finish, and then Deian, you go. David, Deian first.
There you go. It's who you know, David. I've lost my train of thought now. No, there's two things with that. I think there's an element of the public swaying things, and that's part of politics, and that's part of if social care is going to be more of a political football, we in social care will have to get used to that, because that's what happened in the NHS for Dog's Age. And then the second bit of it, I'm not convinced that people in the power really realise what social care is either. And I think that's part of the problem, is that people don't really understand it. Care homes is a much simpler thing to understand than supported living and home care, I think. And it's more of a long-standing establishment, if you like, within the care sector as well. So I think that's probably there's probably two elements of it. But again, if you know, without being in it, it's difficult to tell really. But what's your thoughts, David?
I think there are at least two major elements. One of which is that unless and until the great British public have a relative who requires some kind of social care, whether that be adult social care, everybody understands children's social care, interestingly, and nobody asked any questions about that. It's a given. But adult social care, and then through working age to older people, unless and until the great British public has a family member in it, they neither understand it nor have time to pay any attention to it. But the other major element is that those of us who work in social care, I don't include myself as working day to day, but I work in the area. Those people who work in social care are not focused enough to market social care and their ability in it, and the complexity of working in social care well enough and all the time to make the message about social care be different. If there are a pile of people out there who watched the Rod Gilbert experience in care some time ago, they will have seen a different message about social care. Now, you can't have Rod Gilbert and other comedians on doing that all the time, but there's something about owning and dining out on, literally, not metaphorically, rather than literally dining out on, the experience and complexity of the care required to deliver social care, which will then up the message about it. And with that will come the notion of, righty-ho, we should be paying those people more because they're doing more, and what they do is complex and difficult. And that's across the whole of adult social care. So I'm not just talking older people and dementia and older people's homes and nursing homes. I'm talking about the whole gamut of social care. And that is what we in the sector need to be marketing almost daily, and we should be doing it more now in this period, so that it isn't simply going to disappear in like 6 months' time when/if COVID either goes away or dips in its importance. I'll get off my
soapbox. Yeah, no, it was great. I enjoyed that, and actually, it's a great segue to come to the end of our Co-Produce Care Chat for Care. So I've really enjoyed having both of you on. That little, message you had about messaging is key. And, I instantly want to say, well, how do we do that? What should we do? But then I think, hold on a minute. Co-Produce Care are doing this live stream. We are having this conversation. We will share this video, but we need people to subscribe. So if you haven't already, please do. And I will say a very huge thank you to both of you for joining me today. And I would say good night to you two at the moment.
Well, before you go, Soph, let me just add to that it's as an individual who works in social care, when you're at a party, tell people you work in social care and how proud you are of it. That's the kind of thing will get people as well as your chat. Yes, absolutely. I don't go to that many parties, especially not now. But if I did, and everybody else out there, when we're back to normal. But until then, we need to share, we need to tweet, we need to live stream, we need to do all of these things to get the message out. I think that's really important. So thank you both very much. That's David Smallacombe and Deian Glyn from Care and Support West. So just a couple of things that
at the end of this, thank you everyone for hanging on. We've gone over the hour today, but I just felt I wanted to give those two just a little bit more time to finish off. I hope you've enjoyed. If you have, then do like. Tomorrow we've got Jez, so that is Bethany's dad, coming on our show. And Jez is going to be fantastic to talk to because he's a parent whose daughter has autism, and he has been through some really testing times with her and her situation. She was in assessment and treatment unit, and if you don't, he's been on a lot of media at the end of last year because he had to go to court around it. Huge abuses going on that she faced in care services, but there's a light at the end of the tunnel. She's doing really, really well now. I'll share this photo. I mean, if you follow Jez on Twitter, you'll know that he's had a really hard time with her, but he's going to be talking about how Bethany's been getting on. He will introduce his journey to people who don't know about it. But if you know people who are parents or carers, or even people who have autism, or, you know, anybody who might, care providers, anyone who might find Jez's experience interesting, then do let them know. And 7 o'clock tomorrow we'll be speaking to Jez, and obviously, you know, join our channel and share that information. But the whole aim is, up till now we've had some leaders from social care, we've had a politician on, we've had a care association tonight and solicitor, but we also want to have people with lived experience. We want to have parents. We want to hear as many voices as possible. That's the whole point of this channel, is to open up and democratize the care debate. So really excited to have Jez on tomorrow. So please do tune in. And obviously, if you can't make it, we're on 3 nights this week, so it's a lot. Then you can watch back anytime using the same link. Another thing to mention, I did say about there's a consultation that's out at the moment by the Health and Social Care Select Committee. So they will hear what they call evidence from people about a subject, and then they will do a report and then report back to the government, or just have that as evidence that ministers or whoever else can use. They're gathering information on social care workforce. So the timelines have changed for this. It was going to be, I think, last month. It's now next month. It's next week, I think, the 5th. So we really need to get this information in as quickly as possible. They're looking at a couple of things: how they fund the social care workforce, but also how they deal with gaps in people that work in the workforce, how we retain people, and how do we get people to work in social care. And we're quite passionate about changing the career prospects along with the pay of people, to attract people to the industry and to the sector. So we're doing a couple of things. We will be holding a webinar later on this week on Friday. And then we'll also be doing a survey. So if you just, if you follow us on Twitter, that's probably the best way. There's a link in the chat now. But if you follow us on Twitter, then we are tweeting regularly about this consultation. Again, we really want to try and get as many voices in as possible. So if you can engage with it, if you have time on Friday, if you get onto the webinar, if you answer the survey, we'll do all the hard work and put it all together and send it off to the Health and Select Committee on your behalf. And we'll feed them back your issues, your thoughts on workforce and social care. How can we improve it? How can we sort out the pay issue? What should we do about careers? I don't want to put things in your mind, but whatever views you have, then we're going to put that all together as Coproduce Care, and we're going to send it off by the deadline, which is the 5th of June. So we've given ourselves a bit of a task, but we don't want it to be us rambling on to the Select Committee in our feedback on it. We really want to hear your views. Right, I think I've said enough on that. So really, it's just to say thank you, everybody, for joining this evening. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow to talk to Jez. And on Thursday, if you are interested to hear about what charities or voluntary community organisations are doing, we'll be hearing from 3 organisations, including Acorn, including the food service. So that's an international voluntary charity that gets, many volunteers together to help. At the moment, I think they're delivering food, but they're doing a lot more as well. And we have also Can Do Bristol, which also is getting volunteers together. I think they've managed to get 8,000 volunteers to help in the COVID response and trying to coordinate help in the area. So if you're interested in volunteers, Thursday at 7 o'clock, and tomorrow we'll be talking to a parent, Bethany's dad. Bethany has autism, and she's doing great now. So tune in on 7 o'clock tomorrow to listen to us talk to Jez. But for now, thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing you again later in the week. Take care, everybody.